My friends, the battle for key Donbass city has started. Russia's 8th Army launched a major offensive on Kostiantynivka from all directions. As I'm speaking, Russian storm detachments have already secured the southern districts of the city, and small infantry teams are infiltrating deep into the urban area.
So it begins.
And we can definitely say that the Battle of Kostiantynivka will be decisive. If Ukraine can hold it, it is unlikely that Russia will be able to take over Donetsk Oblast. However, if Russia captures this fortress city, then it will pave the way for the final battles of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. And Kostiantynivka is not some small random village. It had a population of 67,000 inhabitants before the war, almost like Bakhmut. So you can understand the magnitude of what's to come. As you can see, the situation for Ukraine is critical. Here, Ukrainian media reported how the enemy has almost completely taken control of the logistical routes. Russia uses a large number of FPVs.
Enemy UAV spotted.
Additionally, the Russian army relies on small rifle teams that bypass enemy positions and slip into rear areas. And let's just say it gets messy. As a result, these infiltrations have left many Ukrainian units cut off and isolated. For example, these 2 Ukrainian soldiers held their dugout for 130 days straight before linking back with friendly forces. And it keeps on happening.
Madness.
As you can imagine, all this is very exhausting for the Ukrainian infantrymen defending the city of Kostiantynivka. However, the situation is not completely desperate for Ukraine. The fortress is defended by some of Ukraine's most elite formations. Only a portion of the city has fallen in 4 months of fighting. And who knows, maybe Gandalf and the cavalry from Rohan will save the day. Whoops, wrong movie. So in this video, we will analyze the entire battle of Kostiantynivka step by step, both from a tactical and operational perspective. And at the end, we will try to understand what could happen next. Why is nobody talking about the hidden performance experiments connected to the military? And the key is this: NMN by Black Forest. But just listen to what Tony Robbins had to say in this clip.
Have a competing component, because they can only do so much, which is cleaning up your DNA. These sirtuins have a fuel that you've probably heard of called NAD. So NAD is wonderful, but NAD is a size molecule that, as you probably know, needs a precursor called NMN to actually get into the body.
David Sinclair and his research group gave NMN to mice. And within just 14 days, those mice were running 200 to 300% more than even the youngest and strongest ones of the group. Tony Robbins talks about a compound that restores mitochondrial function, meaning your cells regain the ability to turn energy production on and off efficiently again. This is where we have to talk about NAD, a molecule your body has a ton of when you're young. The problem is that by the time you hit 40, your NAD levels are cut in half. And that decline is one of the main triggers of aging. First, your energy drops, then it's your recovery. Now you might think you can just take NAD directly and get all the anti-aging and energy benefits. But no, it's not that simple. Check out what human biologist Gary Blecka had to say.
You know, NAD, it's actually not NAD, it's NAD+, and that little positive is the reduced form of NAD, which means that charge can't really pass through first-pass metabolism. You can't just drop NAD into the stomach. It will just immediately dissociate.
What your body needs is NMN, like this one by Black Forest. Because NMN is the precursor your cells convert into NAD naturally. A Harvard clinical trial found that 1,000 milligrams of NMN daily safely increased NAD levels by up to 2 times. Researchers also observed reductions in fat mass, cholesterol, blood pressure, confirming NMN's potential to reverse key markers of metabolic aging. And the best part is that Black Forest just launched their New Year, New Me biggest deal of the year. And it's absolutely insane. Buy one, get one free of their best-selling NMN product. But it's available for 48 hours only. And the offer is only available if you use the link in the description below. So don't hesitate, because stocks are running out quickly. During the summer of 2025, Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka were both about to be encircled by Russian forces. And because of that, I mentioned the strategic significance of Kostiantynivka multiple times in my previous reports. It's because not only is it threatening Pokrovsk with encirclement, but it's also threatening Kostiantynivka with encirclement. Personally, I think the Russian command will first concentrate on reducing the Pokrovsk salient, while pinning down as many Ukrainian units in Kostiantynivka. And once the Battle of Pokrovsk is over, Russian forces will pivot to the east towards Kostiantynivka. It's just a matter of time before Ukrainian formations withdraw north of the Klebanbitske reservoir. In turn, this will bring Russian forces within striking distance of Kostiantynivka. But that being said, the Battle of Kostiantynivka really started in late October 2025. And by that time, we can see how the city was semi-encircled. But in this case, even a semi can choke out a fortress city. From there, the Russian command of the 8th Command Arms Army had two options. Option 1, attempt to encircle the fortress, or Option 2, carry out a head-on assault. So in this video, you will discover which option the Russian command selected. Here's a little hint. On the 24th of October, Russian forces got a foothold inside Kostiantynivka for the first time. Their first touchdown. Russian rifle teams were securing one building after another. That's when they were greeted by drone pilots of the 28th Mechanized Brigade. At the same time, the Russian 103rd Motor Rifle Regiment bombarded Ukrainian positions in Pleshivka. 24 hours later, the 54th Motor Rifle Regiment targeted Ukrainian positions in Shcherbinivka with drone drops. This was followed by Russian storm detachments mopping up the remaining buildings of the village one by one.
We have captured a building, my lord!
With the fall of Shcherbinivka, the front line around Kostiantynivka looked like that. Russian forces were 5 to 8 kilometers from the first houses of the town. But what really helped the Ukrainian defense was the Klebanbik reservoir, which bottlenecked Russian axes of progression towards Kostiantynivka. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces harassed Russian forces located inside Donetsk. It's not a coincidence, because this large urban area allowed the Russian 8th Army to conceal large concentrations of forces. And that's how the Russian command planned a head-on assault on Kostiantynivka. But with a modern twist.
Fire all the drones now!
Russian drones went on the hunt for enemy infantry, and it was a real carnage. They cleared the entire road going to Kostiantynivka of Ukrainian forces. It got so bad that in this footage, we can see Ukrainian police officers of the Predator Brigade shooting down drones circling over the city. Actually, this reminds me of skeet shooting. I mean, nowadays it's a real survival skill to have. And now that I think about it, instead of selecting the best marksmen and training them as snipers, infantry companies should assign them to form anti-drone squads. On the 28th of October, Ukrainian drones of the 36th Marine Brigade struck this fortified bastion south of Pretechchine. Pretechchine. Yeah, let's just run with it. Maybe they just should have stuck with the old Soviet name. Anyway, if we look at the video, we can observe how the trench bastion is quite impressive. But if we move on to the map, it gets even more interesting. We can see how Pretechchine sits in some sort of valley. And right here is our trench bastion. We can also observe that its purpose was to protect this country road going into the village. On top of that, this position was supported by 2 other bastions on each flank, plus additional trenches along the entire road. However, in the age of drones, such field fortifications have become obsolete. Which begs the question, what does a modern fortification look like? And then 4 kilometers to the south, more Russian soldiers were detected as they approached Ivanopyllia. Meanwhile, the settlement of Pleshivka was still under Ukrainian control. And somehow, it would remain so for months. For the Ukrainian command, the most sensitive area to monitor 24/7 was this rail embankment leading straight into Kostiantynivka. As you can see, there are thick tree lines on both sides, which provide excellent cover for advancing infantry units. The more bush there is, the more progress Russian riflemen make. So the Ukrainian command didn't really know from what direction the jab would come from. Well, they didn't wait long, and they got their answer on the 30th of October, as Russian forces launched a major attack from Oleksandro-Shultine. The drone operators of the Ukrainian 104th Territorial Defense Brigade tried their best to halt enemy progression, but eventually Russian rifle teams got a foothold inside Kostiantynivka. For the second time. Meanwhile, Russian recon drones spotted the location of an enemy team of drone operators somewhere east of Kostiantynivka. They followed them and then targeted their hideout. This is now a key component of the modern art of war, the destruction of enemy UAV teams. November 2025. Ukrainian soldier and journalist Yuri Butusov wrote the following on Telegram.
And here we go.
We are preparing for the worst case scenario of the Battle of Kostiantynivka. The enemy is already approaching the city from 3 sides. Next, an attempt at a complete drone blockade. By the 3rd of November, Ukraine's Khrizhak brigade spotted Russian concentration of forces outside the village of Pleshivka. It's really like a game of hide and seek, but with fatal consequences if you get caught. A bit like in Squid Game. The next day, Russian drones of the 103rd Motor Rifle Regiment already targeted the settlement. Meanwhile, 2 Ukrainian soldiers were ambushed in the woods west of Predtechine. Hopefully, they're not gonna fight too long for that village because it's a real tongue twister. And this despite full camo outfit in the middle of the woods. Kinda creepy to know how lethal drones have become. Like a Ukrainian soldier once told me, it ruins the fun of going to war. No, what he actually said was that drones are gay! All this to say that in the sector of Kostiantynivka, Russian drones have really become the masters of the air. And all of a sudden, Ukrainian forces were targeted in Russian-held Oleksandro-Shultine.
What are you doing here?
Now, apparently the story is that these guys got cut off, and the Ukrainian command tried their best to get them out. To cover their retreat, they sent in a couple UGVs packed with goodies and anti-tank mines against enemy-held buildings. That's why determining areas of control or drawing a line of the contact line is so difficult these days. It's almost impossible, actually. The front resembles more patchwork of defensive positions that even sometimes overlap each other. That same day, a Russian patrol reached the hamlet of Neripivka, just outside Pleshivka. That's how a Russian soldier survived 4 FPV drone strikes and even managed to run away. Check this out, strike number 1, drone number 2, 3, and 4, and then he escaped. On the 7th of November, Russian artillery released the heaviest loads on Pleshivka. The entire village was hammered. In the footage, we can see how Russian artillery batteries targeted the dense network of trenches that were built to protect the settlement. On the map, we can detect how these fortifications are located behind the village. And we can observe 7 trenches precisely, all of them meant to protect this gap between the reservoir and the village. And while we're at it, Pleshivka will be a difficult stronghold for Russia to capture. It's protected by a river on 3 sides, and it sits on commanding heights. Nonetheless, the Russian bombardment took its toll on the settlement. Once the howitzers destroyed all the houses, it was Russian drones that went in on the hunt for Ukrainian infantry. And it seems that some of the defenders just had enough and abandoned their positions. But then it was Russian positions that were bombarded north of Yablonivka. Yes. Because while the AFU was facing a frontal assault against Kostiantynivka, there was a real threat on the Ukrainian right flank of a Russian attack starting in Yablonivka. This is where the Russians would concentrate its forces for the big push. So keep an eye on the sector. Meanwhile, there was heavy fighting in this mine south of Pleshivka, nicknamed Mine Number 12, or the mine named after Saint Matrona of Moscow. Russian TV followed an assault squad fighting in this claustrophobic environment.
Наш штурмовик с позывным «Чахлый» сумел заскочить в здание в нескольких метрах от позиции ВСУ. Пошли. Напарник, Ваха, прикрывает из автомата. Боевики в любой момент могут открыть огонь, причем неизвестно откуда, но Чахлый уверенно идет вперед, со взрывчаткой в руках.
Кобра, да нет, давай, короче, еще 2 таких туда по-братски.
Нормально. И сыпалось на меня, а что делать? Мы набросали взрывчатки туда больше 80 килограмм, а то, может, и за 100 мы не считали.
Вот такие игрушки мы делаем с пластилина.
On the 12th of November, the Russians carried out another push against Kostiantynivka, meaning either the previous attempts had been repulsed, or that the Russian soldiers holding this breachhead inside the urban area were in serious need of reinforcements. The Russian command sent countless sabotage teams, motorcycles, quads, penguins, everything in the book. But in the end, the assault failed. And it was pushed back by the 28th Mechanized Brigade with considerable losses. And with this footage, we can also notice how Ukrainian bomber drones repeatedly targeted the rail embankment. So this goes to show that it was from this direction that Russian forces trickled down into Kostiantynivka. The situation was critical and the general staff of the AFU decided to respond in strength. On the 14th of November, the Ukrainian 28th Mechanized Brigade launched a series of mechanized counterattacks. The 2nd Self-Propelled Artillery Battalion covered the assault as it pummeled enemy entrenchments. As part of this push, the AFU launched a fire mission against Oh my god. Let's just restart. As part of this push, the AFU launched a fire mission against that village with 2 tanks. Now, we don't have footage from the Ukrainian perspective, but all we know is that on their way back, the 2 T-72s were intercepted by Russian drones of the 1442nd Motor Rifle Regiment. And then fiber optics drones kept targeting the vehicle's weak spots until they were immobilized. Yeah, and this one got very immobilized. Like my dream of starting a fitness page. Oh yeah, on a side note, this Ukrainian artillery crew showed this. My craft is death. This is a direct reference to the lore of Warhammer 40k. So instead of religious references like the wars in the Middle East, this is a war of nerds and geeks. No, seriously, there's also a strong religious presence in this conflict, and if you're interested, I covered it in depth in this video, and you will see how Warhammer 40k is always nearby. 1 week later, on the 20th of November, the Russian 8th Army returned for another charge. Some Russian infantry detachments were targeted as they advanced through this rail embankment we mentioned earlier, but numerous assault units still managed to get through. That's how the Russians started storming the village of Ivanopyllia. Everything happened so fast, and all of a sudden, the 78th and 1194th Motor Rifle Regiments raised their banners on the village. The Ukrainians didn't even have time to recover. That using the momentum of this victory, Russian sabotage groups immediately started infiltrating in the direction of Kostiantynivka. Yet the only Ukrainian stronghold left south of the city was Plishivka and Klebanbik. But there's more, because 48 hours later, Russian mortars started shelling Alexandro Shultine. Bro, what? Now this wasn't an accident, because the next day, dozens of Russian drone strikes shook the entire village, thus confirming solid Ukrainian presence. I mean, take a look at this map. Ukrainian dugouts reported all across the place. So these guys were not cut off like we thought earlier. The Russians just never secured the village. They just bypassed it and moved on directly to Kostiantynivka. And that explains why a Russian ammunition depot was detected and then destroyed as part of this push. This means Russian infantrymen are like a trail of, for me, like ants. Every soldier carries supplies and ammunition, and they stockpile everything in safe houses for future assault operations. Because at this point of the war, it's just impossible to resupply frontline units, even with quads or motorcycles. And guess what? Russian drone operators now recycle Ukrainian heavy bomber Vandal drones. That's crazy. And now that I think about it, it's true. I haven't seen Russian units make use of heavy bomber drones like the Ukrainians. So this goes to show how the Ukrainians still have an edge in drone warfare. On the 28th of November, Russian forces pushed once again into Kostiantynivka. These guys are very persistent. They can't take no for an answer. This time, the gray zone greatly expanded, and as a result, many Ukrainian troops found themselves cut off, and they could only be resupplied with drone drops. What's crazy is that there was this French general that wrote a book about the future of warfare, and I remember him saying that in the age of drones, the front line as we know it is going to disappear. And what we're seeing from the Ukraine war front line has proved him right. The next day, on the 29th of November, Russian drones hammered the southern part of Kostiantynivka. That's when Russian rifle teams managed to infiltrate the fortress and secured the southern outskirts of the town.
Into the breach! Our men flee the battlefield!
Now that was in November. How come the Russians didn't take more of Kostiantynivka? Yes. December 2025. On December 2nd, Ukrainian drone strikes rained on Kostiantynivka. Not only did the enemy breach the gates, but he was now digging in. However, Russian forces could not push beyond the TO504 road. With that being said, by the 5th of December, Ukrainian presence was attested here and here. So once again, we're witnessing this patchwork of areas of control. This could also be because of local counterattacks by the 49th Karpatska Sich Battalion and other Ukrainian Special Forces units. Their main objective was to link up with the isolated outposts and rotate them out.
Enemy UAV spotted.
And as you can see, they're always very attentive to enemy UAVs circling above their heads. Nonetheless, the Ukrainian command could not stop Russian forces from trickling down into Kostiantynivka. On the 13th of December, Russian soldiers were spotted in Predetchchine and Stupochki, while Ukrainian forces increased drone and artillery strikes against Ivanopyllia. And somehow the Ukrainian stronghold of Pleshivka still held despite being hammered all day long. By the 16th, Russian rifle teams pushed north of Ivanopyllia in an attempt to link up with friendly forces in Kostiantynivka. Meanwhile, 5 days later, Russian patrols were also advancing via Stupochki and Predetchchine. The poor weather made it increasingly difficult for Ukrainian drones to spot enemy infiltrations. And then, on the 22nd of December, Ukrainian drone operators could not believe their eyes. After weeks of slow infiltrations, the Russian command had enough and ordered a mechanized assault against Kostiantynivka. Yeah, well, in summary, muchos, explosion, bigos, fireworks. The column consisted of 2 fully caged up armored vehicles, and they got hammered so bad. No joke, every Ukrainian brigade jumped on the bandwagon and sent in their drones to join the fireworks. From the footage I could see, I think in the end, 24 drones hit each of the Russian armored vehicles. This goes to show how difficult it is for armored vehicles to progress in the modern battlefield. And this despite being fully caged up. The day armored vehicles are going to be able to push through the wall of drones, then we're going to see big arrows offensives again. Until then, it's going to be a slow grind. The next day, on the 23rd of December, our boy Yuri Butusov wrote about an extraordinary story. He explains how call signs Bars and K2 returned from a position in the area of the city of Kostiantynivka, where they held a dugout for 130 days. 4 months and a half, they were there since the 15th of August. Now that's a long shift. At this point, joining Ukrainian infantry is like signing up for the night's watch. According to the 2 infantrymen, the most difficult was the first firefight with the enemy. They said that was the most terrifying, and after that, it was like a routine. It's good when you're the one shooting, not the one being shot at. At some point after one of the firefights, the AK-47 of call sign Bars was damaged, so he grabbed the AK-12 from one of the fallen enemy soldiers. And get this, when the 2 soldiers got back to friendly lines, they had a friend with them. Alongside them, they took a 23-year-old Russian soldier prisoner, Danila Shivov from Volgograd. What happened is that during one of the firefights, this Russian soldier surrendered to these 2 fighters. But there was no opportunity to evacuate him, so he became roommate with the 2 Ukrainian soldiers in their dugout for over 2 months. Anyway, this story goes to show the impossible task of carrying out simple rotations these days. And this adds even more strain on infantrymen. But there's a reason for this. So many vehicles sent forward for evacuations or rotations of rifle units get ambushed along the way. As you can see, December was relatively calm in the Kostiantynivka sector. Ukraine avoided the nightmare scenario, but this would change very quickly. January 2026. The new year started with heavy snowfall. Here you can see all the snow and Russian infantrymen taking cover in an underground position before they get targeted by enemy drones. But you get an idea of what the front line must have looked like. Meanwhile, Russian drones from the 103rd Motorized Rifle Regiment continuously struck Ukrainian dugouts on the high ground beyond Ivanopyllia. At one point, the Russians released the pressure on this sector, and that's when on the 6th of January, Stanislav and his 2 comrades saw an opportunity to escape from their dugout, a position they held for 271 days. In this interview, he explained that after the Russian storming of Ivanopyllia, his group got cut off and lost contact with the HQ. They were marked as missing in action for a month, until they managed to escape and resurface. But on the 8th of January, despite such positive anecdotal stories, the Ukrainian command in Kostiantynivka was getting worried by the increasing number of Russian forces pushing from the east. At the same time, Chechen fighters from the 78th Motor Rifle Regiment cleared the Ukrainian dugouts west of Ivanopyllia. Since storming the stronghold of Pleshivka head-on didn't work, the idea was now to cut off the garrison by taking hold of this area at the rear. And on the 11th of January, the Russians finally took control of Oleksandro-Shultine. Either all the Ukrainian defenders were retreated, or they managed to slip out during a Russian vodka cigarette break. Meanwhile, Ukrainian soldiers of the 28th Mechanized Brigade held basements of high-rise buildings in Kostiantynivka, constantly keeping an eye on the sky during movements. Many of their vehicles had been destroyed by a never-ending stream of fiber optics drones. But they were not the only ones that were getting nervous. On the 14th of January, Russian patrols were targeted 5 kilometers north from Yablonivka and were now fighting on the outskirts of the village of Bereztok.
A devastating loss for the enemy!
Oh, so hold on. This frontal attack against Kostiantynivka could have been a diversion to pin down Ukrainian reserves, while Russian forces prepared another strike from the flanks. The situation worsened quickly since by the 17th, Russian troops were now spotted even further, this time just south of the settlement of Ilinivka. Yeah, it was becoming a real disaster for the AFU. And while the Ukrainian right flank was getting turned, Russian infantry was now encroaching itself in the woods east of Kostiantynivka. In this direction, a Russian soldier exposed his position using a flashlight, and his position got bombed shortly after. Yeah, rookie mistake. Here's a Russian night vision FPV drone that struck an entire team of Ukrainians in Ivanopyllia. Because even at night, you're not safe as a rifleman. Simultaneously, Bereztok was getting pummeled. It seemed the Russian command was softening enemy positions before the general assault. By the 21st of January, the 112th Territorial Defense Brigade was trying to stem the flow of Russian reinforcements pouring into Kostiantynivka. And then came another crazy story. On January 23rd, 2 Ukrainian soldiers from that same 112th Territorial Defense Brigade, Ihor and Volodymyr, fell into an ambush. They got wounded and captured by the enemy. They got split up and Volodymyr ended up with 4 Russian soldiers, 2 of which were wounded. But then a Ukrainian relief force reached their dugout. 2 of the 4 Russians escaped, leaving only the 2 wounded ones with Volodymyr, and he convinced them to surrender. They didn't have much choice, right? It was either that or here's a grenade, have fun. So the Ukrainian made contact with friendly forces that were awaiting him, but as this group left the dugout, one of the 2 Russian soldiers got KIA from an artillery strike. But yeah, Volodymyr managed to get back with a prisoner. This war keeps surprising me. If I'd seen such a story in a war movie, I would have said, this is fantasy. Although we know how Hollywood would have tweaked the story. Volodymyr would have brought back 10, 20 Russian prisoners. On the 24th of January, the Russian 8th Army bombarded the entire battlefield. Everywhere, any remaining building was being destroyed, shattered, ruins everywhere. Ivanivka was shelled, Stepanivka was shelled, followed by FAB bombs and waves of drones that made life hell for Ukrainian forces. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drone operators spotted how the 8th Army concentrated its assault formations inside Ivanopyllia as a staging ground for the assault on Kostiantynivka. But then on the 25th of January, it's south of Bereztok that Russian storm detachments started converging, as the Ukrainian 156 Mechanized Brigade struggled to keep enemy assault squads at bay. And notice how the Russians constantly make use of former Ukrainian entrenchments to find cover. 2 days later, the Ukrainian command sent some infantry to reinforce Bereztok for the upcoming battle. But then it's from the other side that the jab came from. Despite the intervention of dozens of bomber drones, the southern district then came firmly under control of the Russian 4th Motor Rifle Brigade. This entire sector had fallen. Ukrainian forces could only be attested in these buildings. We end the month of January with another group of Ukrainian soldiers that spent months on the front line.
Again!
These two soldiers, call signs Logoped and Sidi from the 93rd Mechanized Brigade, left their positions near Kostiantynivka and linked up with friendly forces after 100 days of hell. At that point, it's really like fighting your way out of the abyss. And yeah, all these stories look heroic on the surface, but the situation is getting out of hands. February 2026. So as Russian infantry units advanced into Kostiantynivka, so did their UAV operators. That's how on the 2nd of February, a Ukrainian YPR-765 was immobilized north of the city. The next day, Russian soldiers were targeted in the mechanic shop inside Ivanopyllia. The village kept getting hammered. Ivanopyllia was getting pummeled by artillery and drone strikes. And it got even worse when tanks from the 10th Regiment started hammering the village. Simultaneously, Russian storm detachments were pushing deeper into the fortress. They were making a lot of progress beyond the forest into the eastern side of Kostiantynivka. And then happened something quite rare. On the 7th of February, during one of these firefights, near the settlement of Novodmitrivka, a Russian infantryman had enough and decided to surrender. But as he walked towards Ukrainian lines, he got struck by a Russian FPV drone. What can I tell you? War is hell. However, at the end of the footage, we can see that a second Russian soldier was captured by Ukrainian forces. Now, according to the latest news on the 13th of February, a Ukrainian soldier from the 2nd Battalion, 36th Marine Brigade stood at a gas station in the southern eastern part of Kostiantynivka, allegedly claiming that the city is free of Russian soldiers. And the next day, it's the 44th Mechanized Brigade that pulled the exact same PR stunt.
Right.
Very strange, because on the 15th of February, Ukrainian drones targeted Russian forces literally all across the map. This means the entire eastern side of the city had fallen, including that village that I cannot name, plus this forested area. But that's not all. Some Russian detachments infiltrated their way behind Bereztok. And that same day, Russian recon drones also spotted important concentrations of Ukrainian forces across Kostiantynivka. It's clear that the general staff of the AFU does not intend to give up the city. And that's pretty much where the front stands today. So the moment you've all been waiting for, what can we expect next? From the Ukrainian perspective, it will be important to hold the western side of town at all costs. First, because it sits on commanding heights, there's a river that cuts through the city that would limit enemy infiltrations, plus numerous large structures, high-rise buildings, and warehouses that could form a number of defensive nodes. It would also be important for the Ukrainians to counterattack and to reclaim these woods on the eastern part of the city, to avoid being outflanked from the east. On the other side, we can expect Russian forces to continue their infiltration missions inside Kostiantynivka in order to chop up, isolate, and encircle Ukrainian strongholds. They will probably use this force to launch flanking attacks on the exposed eastern side of the city, which consists of a large residential district. And because of that, we can expect heavy fighting for the settlement of Novodmitrivka. Meanwhile, we can also expect Russian patrols to push north from Ivanopyllia. This could be combined with the storming of Ivanivka and Bereztok, these bulwarks that protect the western side of the town. However, if these positions fall, this would allow Russian forces to expand their area of control on the western side of Kostiantynivka, namely into this high-rise district that would be ideal to concentrate manpower and supplies for future operations. That's all I have for you today. Remember to check out Black Force supplements. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.